Yes, today we are going to discuss about issues that matters most in journalism. And before I could actually hinge on feature writing stories, let me start by orienting you on important issues when dealing with newspaper. I will start here by explaining this part of the newspaper, which is the first part of the newspaper. I've got with me here a copy of the Sunday Mail, so I'm going to explain using this Sunday Mail. And if you look at the first part of the paper with the color blue there, written the Sunday Mail and established in 1935, and with a summary of what can be found inside the newspaper. That part we call it a masthead, and a masthead, it is that part or the front face of a newspaper that shows when that newspaper was established, and also gives an overview, a summary of the stories that can be found within the newspaper. And at the same time, that masthead, it has the colors of the newspaper. If you look at different newspapers, they've got different colors. Like if you look at the Sunday Mail, its color that distinguish it from the rest of the newspaper is the blue and white, right? If you look at the Herald, it is the red and black and white. So we call that it's a masthead. And after the masthead, what follows is what we call the headline. And the headline should give the summary of the story. It tells you what the story is all about. And we are saying that headlines should be kept short, and they should be written in active or in present verbs. And the first story in a newspaper, we call it a lead story. And a lead story, it is the story that appears in the front face of a newspaper. It sells the newspaper, and it should be provocative. It should be appetizing. It should whet the appetite of the reader. Yes, it sells the paper. And what follows after the headline in a lead story is what we call the byline. And the byline usually tells or shows the originality of the story, the person who would have originated that story. It authenticates the story, and usually someone is being given a byline to show that that's an original story. And apart from showing that it is an original story, the story would be free from grammatical mistake. And a byline assists that if the reader is having queries, he knows who exactly to approach. And in a story, we've got what we call the sources, and the sources is where we tap information. Human beings, they are a source, and human beings can be reached through interviews. If you want to find out about certain activities or a certain event that took place, you really have to find out from those who participated or those who witnessed it. And as a source, you really have to sit down with them, you interview, you talk to them. And if they are willing to open up, then you use that information to write a story. And to show that you are not lying, you should actually quote. And quotations, these are genuine words. So quotation can be verbatim from word to word. The information that you'd have tapped from your sources as they tell you the story, you can actually include that, and it should be in quotes to show that these are really words from the source. And we've got quite a number of sources. A television set, for your own sake of information, is a source. You look at the radio set, it is a source. Internet, if you go online, it is a source. A novel, again, it is a source. It can be used in the crafting of a story. And when dealing with hard news, you really have to keep it short, right? It should be precise, pellucid as a manner as it demands, and you should not compromise its impact. It should have what we call the human interest. There are what we call the nitty-gritties in journalism, in story crafting. we are saying that you keep the sentences short. And usually in journalism, we know that we've got three types of sentences. We have got the simple sentence, like if I say the men killed the kudu, and a complex sentence when we say the man who killed the kudu was arrested. And we have got what we call the compounding sentences. So in journalism, we usually encourage you to keep your sentences short. So you be forced to use what we call simple sentences or compounding sentences and avoid complex sentences. So I'm going to talk about feature writing. What is feature writing? And feature writing, if you ask any journalist, what is feature writing? Anything that isn't news is feature writing. And feature writing prolongs, it stands the test of time, right? It stands the test of time, but it should have human interest, and it is being told with wisdom and insight of the reader. Well, you find that most of the feature stories, though they use some of the W's, but a good feature story will use all the W's. And if you read Pap and Featherstone, that is 2006, page 2, he will then tell you that a feature story prolongs and stands the test of time, and it should capture what we call the human interest. And you find that when you're writing a feature story, we've got different types of leads. And by the way, the leads, we are looking at the first part of the story, or we are looking at what we call the introduction. And in journalism, we don't talk of introductions. No, fine, I know that in a story there are three tiers, namely the introduction, which is the lead, the body, and the conclusion. So if you are writing a feature story is like someone who is writing an essay, and it is mainly guided by three tiers, that is the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. So when looking at the leads, we've got what we call the quote leads. And quote leads, from the word quotation, you can quote from someone. For instance, someone can start a story by saying, we are not of yesterday, but we are of today. So that is a quote. It's a quotation, and it should be in quotes. And again, when you are writing a quotation lead, you should show where you have extracted that quotation. Yes, and we've got what we call the descriptive lead. A descriptive lead, you start by describing the vicinity, right? And then you go on to the main story. But as you write, well, especially if you're writing a feature story, you are sharing an insight with your readers. And then we've got what we call the narrative lead, where you start by narrating, because writing is an art. It has to be blended. You can actually write a story using what we call the rhetoric. You embellish your story, right? You can actually write it in a heuristic persona, that is using the third person and using the we, right? So writing is an art which needs to be blended. So when writing a feature story we say it is something that isn't news, but something that can be found in newspapers. But feature stories, they are more rife in magazines than in newspapers. And if a feature story appears in a newspaper, it is placed right in the middle of the newspaper, because it is not that newsworthy, though it is educative, because mind you that a journalist is there to educate, to entertain, to guide the society and keep the moral upright. Then apart from that, let me quickly move on to a profile. So a profile, you are giving an overview of a place or an overview of an individual. For instance, let's say if you are writing a profile about a person, a well-known person, or someone who would have done extraordinary. For instance, let's say you are writing about a person who came up with 20 points at advanced level. Or let's say you are writing about a stringer journalist, right? You should first of all find out about that person and ask for his autobiography. If that person is in the process of writing stories, you can actually ask him to send you some of his stories that he crafted, right? And you can then interview him. You want to know when the person was born, where, and how big is the family, and his interest, the food, his credentials that he's holding. So that is part of profile. And profile writing, the reason why we do profile writing, we want to share with the rest what we know about an individual, and at the same time we want to educate about them. So profile, we are sharing information, but again, one need actually to apply journalism basic skills, journalism basic writing skills. So in short, for today we will end there, and if you have got queries or any additional information, please feel free to contribute. Thank you so much. Bye.